My name is Clara Monroe. For 52 years, I lived in a graceful, two-story house in Charleston, South Carolina, a city that holds its history like a breath, fragrant with jasmine and damp with the memory of rain. I was a wife to a good man, a mother to a son, and eventually a grandmother. My husband, Arthur, was a history professor who loved the solid weight of a book in his hands and the quiet rustle of turning pages. He taught me that the past isn't something you escape, it's the soil from which you grow. When he passed, the silence in that house grew so vast it seemed to have its own geography. My life, once a sprawling map of shared moments, shrank to the coordinates of my son, David, and his family. I became the reliable, ever-present matriarch, the keeper of recipes, the emergency babysitter, the silent investor in their ever-expanding lives. I did it because it was what was expected and because, in the quiet ache of my widowhood, their needs gave my days a shape I no longer knew how to find for myself. They said, "Just stay here in the club lounge, Mom. We'll come back for you after we've checked the bags." I nodded, of course. You learn to nod when your son speaks to you in that particular tone, a blend of forced patience and weary obligation, a voice usually reserved for a slow bank teller or a child who has asked the same question for the 10th time. It's a voice that says, "You are an obstacle, but I am a good person for navigating you so kindly." So I sat where he pointed, a plush but worn armchair in the Delta Sky Club, tucked between a ficus tree that was shedding its leaves onto the carpet and a silent television broadcasting market reports. It was 9:15 in the morning. The air hummed with the low, anxious energy of travel. I had been packed for a week, my suitcase lying open in the spare bedroom like a patient guest. I had laid out my outfits, just as I used to do for David's school trips, folding the linen trousers and cotton blouses with a care they didn't deserve. This was to be the grand family vacation to St. Bart's, a gift from David's firm for a successful year. Brenda, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on coordinating outfits for the arrival photo. For the grandchildren, Ethan and Zoe, it was crisp white linen. For me, a beige cashmere shawl she'd given me for Christmas. "It's classic, Clara," she'd said, her smile as thin and brittle as a dried leaf. "It will look elegant." It felt less like a gift and more like a costume chosen to ensure I blended with the background. At the airport drop-off, she'd sighed dramatically when she saw my small, roll-aboard suitcase. "Is that all you're bringing?" she'd asked, as if my modesty were a personal affront. At the security checkpoint, a knot of unease began to tighten in my chest. Brenda kept glancing at her watch. David was on his phone, his brow furrowed. The children, as always, were lost in the blue glow of their own devices. When a TSA agent cheerily asked if our family wanted to go through the line together, Brenda had laughed a strange, sharp laugh. "Oh, we'll figure it out on the other side." It was the last time she looked me directly in the eye. Once we were through the metal detectors and reassembling ourselves, she approached me with that same brittle smile. "Mom, why don't you find a comfortable seat here in the lounge? We'll handle the luggage and get the boarding passes sorted for the kids. Just relax. You deserve it." She patted my arm, a gesture that wasn't meant to comfort, but to place. To still. It was a dismissal disguised as a courtesy. So I sat. And I waited. I watched them walk away, a handsome, self-contained unit, their expensive luggage gliding effortlessly behind them. They disappeared into the throng of travelers, and I was left with the hum of the air conditioning and the silent flicker of the stock market ticker. After an hour, I stood and walked to the large window overlooking the tarmac. Planes taxied like giant, graceful birds. After 2 hours, I asked a lounge attendant if she could page David Monroe. She did, her voice echoing impersonally through the terminal. There was no response. By the 4th hour, the knot in my chest had dissolved, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. I stopped watching the entrance. People came and went. A businessman across from me took 3 conference calls, ate a sad-looking sandwich, and left. A young couple with a baby shared a set of earbuds, their heads leaning together. Flights were announced, boarded, and departed. I remained. It wasn't until nearly 5 p.m., as the afternoon sun slanted low and golden through the windows, that I approached the front desk again. The attendant was a different woman now, with kind eyes and a weary posture. I gave her my son's full name, and she typed it into her computer. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She glanced at me, her professional mask softening with something like pity. "Ma'am," she began, choosing her words with care. "Mr. Monroe and his family checked in for the 1:45 p.m. flight to St. Martin. It's already departed." I nodded slowly, the words landing not like a blow, but like the final, soft click of a lock. I asked her to repeat it. She did, her voice even gentler this time. I remember that kindness. So that was it. They had boarded a plane without me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. I knew my son. David was many things: impatient, self-absorbed, emotionally frugal, but he was not careless. This was an act of precision. An excision. I walked to the restroom and locked myself in a stall. I sat on the closed toilet lid, but not to cry. The tears weren't there. I felt a profound, almost serene emptiness. I just needed to be in a small, enclosed space where no one could see my face and ask if I was all right. When I emerged, the airport was transitioning into its evening rhythm. The frantic energy of the day had mellowed into a weary, transient hum. I walked over to the main departures board, my small carry-on rolling silently beside me. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I simply looked at the glowing list of destinations, the way one might scan a menu in a diner, suddenly free to order anything at all. And then I saw it. Seattle. 7:35 p.m. I don't know why I chose Seattle. Perhaps because the name itself sounded like a promise of quiet waters. Perhaps because Arthur and I had spent a week there on our honeymoon, 53 years ago, and I remembered the astonishing green of it, a green so deep it felt ancient. Or perhaps it was simply because it was the farthest I could get from Charleston, from street Bart's, from the life in which I had become a beige cashmere shawl. I walked to the Alaska Airlines counter. "One ticket to Seattle, please," I said, my voice steady. The young man behind the counter looked at my small bag. "Round trip?" "No," I said, the word feeling clean and sharp in my mouth. "Just one way." I paid with my own credit card from my own account, the one I'd kept open after Arthur died. It was my what-if fund, a small nest egg he'd insisted I maintain for myself. David didn't know about it. I had just enough for the flight, a few weeks in a modest motel, and, perhaps, the beginnings of a plan. I didn't need more than that. I found a quiet corner and took out my phone. I turned it off without checking for messages. Of course there would be none. They were in the air, champagne flutes in hand, believing their problem had been solved. The boarding process was a quiet blur. No one looked twice at the older woman traveling alone. Before heading to the gate, I found a trash can and ceremoniously folded Brenda's beige shawl, placing it gently inside. It settled amongst the discarded coffee cups and newspapers, finally in its proper place. On the plane, I had a window seat. As we ascended, the city lights of Charleston sprawled below me, a glittering web of memories and obligations I was finally flying free of. 8 hours ago, I believed I was being taken to paradise. It turned out I was just being left behind. But now, as the plane banked west into the darkening sky, I felt I was heading somewhere real. Somewhere they couldn't follow. Somewhere I might just find myself again. I landed in Seattle just after 10 p.m. Pacific time. The airport was quieter than I remembered, or maybe it was I who had shrunk, folded inward by the weight of the day. I moved through the terminal with a deliberate slowness, not from age, but from a sudden lack of urgency. No one was waiting for me. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like freedom, not a failing. Outside, the air was cool and damp, carrying the clean, sharp scent of rain on concrete and the faint, woodsy perfume of pine. It smelled like a new beginning. I stood under the fluorescent lights of the passenger pickup area, my small suitcase at my feet, and just breathed. The suitcase was a sturdy, dark green tweed, a gift from Arthur for our 25th anniversary. David had often joked about its age. "Mom, no one uses those anymore," he'd say. But it was well made. It had held. Arthur would have understood today. Not with anger, but with a deep, knowing sadness. Well, Clara, I could almost hear him whisper, "What took you so long?" I wasn't surprised, not really. The abandonment was just the final, stark sentence in a long, quiet story of being gradually erased. I opened my wallet. Inside were two credit cards, my driver's license, $122 in cash, and a tiny, folded slip of paper I hadn't looked at in years. On it, in my own youthful script, was an address, 4212, Finney Avenue North. It was the address of the small boarding house where Arthur and I had stayed on our honeymoon. I didn't know if it still existed. I didn't know why, of all the things to keep, I had kept that. But there it was. I hailed a taxi. The driver was a young woman with purple hair who said nothing, a blessing. I gave her the address of an inexpensive motel I'd found on the airport Wi-Fi. The Emerald City Inn. The name was grander than the reality. When we pulled up to the two-story building with its flickering neon sign, I paid, took my key, and walked up the exterior staircase to the second floor. Room 214. The corridor smelled of bleach and the faint, lingering ghosts of 1,000 other people's journeys. The room was small, but immaculately clean. One double bed with a firm mattress, a small desk, a chair, and a television bolted to the wall. I washed my face at the small sink, the water shockingly cold and clear. I lay down on the bed fully clothed, the starched blanket a rough comfort against my skin. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that comes only after a long fever has finally broken. The next morning, I woke to the soft, gray light of a Pacific Northwest dawn. From my window, I watched a man in a rain jacket jog past with a golden retriever. I made a cup of coffee using the small machine on the desk and sat in the stiff chair, sipping it slowly. For decades, my time had belonged to others. To David's schedule, to Brenda's social calendar, to the grandchildren's school events. Now my time was a vast, uncharted territory, and it was all mine. At 9, I left the motel and began to walk. My hips protested, and a familiar ache settled in my lower back, but I pushed on. The neighborhood was a quiet mix of small, older homes and low-rise apartment buildings. The air was alive with the smell of damp earth and roasting coffee. I found a small bakery called the Rolling Pin and bought a Marionberry scone. The woman behind the counter had flour on her cheek and a warm smile. "You're not from around here," she said, more an observation than a question. "I used to be," I replied. "A very long time ago." "Well," she said, handing me my change. "Welcome back." I didn't know if I was back or if I belonged anywhere anymore, but her words were a small, warm stone in my pocket. I asked her if she knew of a community notice board. She pointed to a large corkboard by the door, cluttered with flyers for yoga classes, dog walkers, and local bands. Tucked in the corner, a small, handwritten index card caught my eye. Room for rent. Quiet, responsible female preferred. Private room, shared bath/kitchen in well-kept home. Fremont area. No drama. $700 per month. Call Hazel. The handwriting was neat, firm, and no nonsense, the writing of a person who meant what she said. I took a photo of the number with a cheap smartphone I rarely used. By noon, I'd walked for miles, ending up in a small park overlooking the water. I sat on a bench and watched a ferry glide across the sound. Then I made the call. The voice that answered was raspy, laced with suspicion. "Yeah, I'm calling about the room for rent," I said. A long pause. "How old are you?" The question was so direct it made me smile. 75. "You clean?" "Yes." "No overnight gentleman callers, I assume?" I let out a small laugh. "Not in a great many years." The voice seemed to soften, just a fraction. "All right. Come by at 4. 28, Fisher Place. Bring the first month's rent in cash if you're serious." She hung up without saying goodbye. At 4 o'clock, I stood before a modest, dark blue craftsman house with a wide, welcoming porch and planters overflowing with geraniums. A wind chime made of sea glass tinkled softly in the breeze. A woman opened the door before I could knock. She was tall and sturdy, with short, silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She held a mug that said, "I've had it up to here." "You the 75-year-old?" she asked. "I suppose I am." She stepped aside. I'm Hazel. Come on in. Let's see if we can stand each other. Hazel's house smelled of lemon polish and old books. It was impeccably tidy but comfortably lived in. Books were stacked on every available surface, and a large, ginger cat was asleep on a pile of newspapers. The room is upstairs, she said, leading the way. I followed her up the solid oak staircase, my hand on the smooth, cool banister. She opened a door at the end of the hall. This is it. It was a simple room, with a twin bed covered in a handmade quilt, a sturdy oak dresser, and a small writing desk tucked into an alcove. But the window was large, looking out over a lush backyard garden, and the afternoon light poured in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt peaceful. It's lovely, I said. $700 a month. First and last. Cash. No checks. I don't do drama, I don't do sob stories, and I don't do late rent. The cat's name is Marmalade. He's in charge. We clear. Crystal, I said. I looked at her directly. You don't seem like the sob story type yourself. For the first time, she smiled, a quick, wry flash. That's the right answer. She held out her hand for a key. You can move your things in whenever you're ready. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope containing $1,400 bills. I hadn't been this sure of anything in a very long time. She took the money without counting it. You hungry? I could eat, I said. Hazel made us toasted cheese sandwiches on thick, grainy bread and opened a can of tomato soup. We ate at her small kitchen table, the silence comfortable and easy. She didn't ask a single question about where I'd come from or why I was there. People always ask too soon, before you've had a chance to shape the story for yourself. She only said, I hate eating alone. And I understood that perfectly. After dinner, I took a taxi back to the motel, collected my small suitcase, and checked out. Back in my new room, I unpacked my few belongings. 3 changes of clothes, my toiletries, my medications, and a worn paperback copy of A Room with a View that I'd never finished. I placed everything carefully in the dresser drawers, folding each item as if it were precious. Perhaps it was. That night, I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of a house that was not my own but felt more like home than the one I'd left. The steady ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, the gentle groan of the floorboards as Hazel moved about downstairs, the distant foghorn from the sound. No one called. No one texted. My phone remained off. The next morning, I was awake before Hazel. I found the coffee maker and made a pot, the familiar ritual grounding me. The kitchen felt more real than the gleaming, sterile one in David and Brenda's house, a kitchen designed for show, not for living. On my 3rd day in Seattle, I began to explore my new neighborhood in earnest. 2 blocks down from Hazel's house, I found a small cafe called The Daily Grind. A handwritten sign was taped to the window, help wanted. Morning shift. Barista/counter. Apply within. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. I hadn't worked a paying job in over 40 years. But I knew my way around a coffee pot, and I wasn't afraid of early mornings. Inside, the cafe was cozy and warm, filled with the rich aroma of coffee and cinnamon. A young woman with a nose ring was wiping down the counter. Are you hiring? I asked. She looked up surprised. You want to apply? Yes. She called to the back, Rosa. Someone's here about the sign. A compact, energetic woman with dark, curly hair tied back in a bandana emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her name tag read Rosa. You have experience, she asked, her gaze sharp and assessing. I've run a household for 50 years, raised a son, and managed a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood, I said. I can make coffee, I can be on time, and I know how to listen. And I don't get sick. Rosa stared at me for a beat, a slow smile spreading across her face. Trial shift. Tomorrow. 6 a.m. to noon. If you survive, we'll talk. That evening, I hand-washed and ironed the one good blouse I owned. I went to bed early but lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. It had been less than a week since the airport, less than a week since I had been left behind like so much unwanted luggage. But something profound had shifted inside me. I was no longer waiting for a phone call, for an apology, for my life to be given back to me. I was walking. I was working. I was beginning. And no one needed to know. Not yet. This quiet, unexpected new life was mine, and mine alone. The cafe smelled of strong coffee, burnt toast, and second chances. I arrived at 5:45 a.m., the sky outside still a deep, velvety indigo. The front door was locked. A lanky young man with glasses and a flour-dusted apron let me in, grunting what might have been a hello before disappearing back into the kitchen. Rosa arrived at 10 to 6, a steaming travel mug in one hand. She unlocked the cash register and handed me a clean, dark green apron without ceremony. Hair back, no perfume, she instructed. Refill a customer's coffee before their cup is empty. Learn the regulars' names. And if someone complains, smile, nod, and get me. I nodded. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Nervous? No, I said, tying the apron string securely behind my back. I'm 75. I've buried a husband, survived a son who thinks my presence is a chore, and sat through countless PTA meetings. This is just coffee. Rosa let out a short, sharp laugh. Fair enough. You might just make it. By 7, the first wave of regulars washed in, construction workers on their way to a job site, nurses coming off the night shift at the nearby hospital, quiet figures hunched over laptops. I moved with a slow but steady grace. I remembered orders. I poured coffee with a hand that did not tremble. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't ask for anything in return. By 9, I had found a rhythm. It was a dance I hadn't known. I remembered the sway and turn of a busy service, the quiet choreography of tending to others' small needs. Where'd they find you? One of the regulars, a burly man with a kind face, asked as I refilled his mug. On the shelf in the back, I replied smoothly. Where they keep all the things that are still perfectly good, but have been forgotten. He chuckled and left a $5 tip on the table. Rosa saw it. She didn't say anything, but after the morning rush subsided, she poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. We closed at noon. She cashed out the register, then gestured to the stool next to her. Sit. I sat. You did all right, she said, which from Rosa felt like high praise. You're hired. Minimum wage plus tips. No benefits, but the hours are steady. Weekday mornings, if you want them. That's more than enough, I said. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. You got family around here? She asked, her tone casual. They're traveling, I said simply. She nodded, accepting the answer for what it was, a closed door. Aren't they always? I walked back to Hazel's house with sore feet and a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. She was in her front garden, ruthlessly pulling weeds from a bed of roses. Her t-shirt said, "Go away, I'm reading." Get the job, she called out without looking up. I did. Told you, she grunted, yanking a stubborn dandelion from the soil. They need people who show up. That evening, we ate frozen lasagna and watched the evening news on mute. Marmalade, the ginger cat, curled up on the rug between us. You planning on staying long? Hazel asked during a commercial break. I don't know, I said honestly. You can stay as long as you pay the rent and don't hog the remote. I don't even like the remote, I said. She smiled and passed me the last piece of garlic bread. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my dormant phone. I thought about turning it on, about checking for the inevitable messages. I didn't. Instead, I picked up my copy of A Room with a View and started again from the first page. The light from my small desk lamp cast a warm, golden glow on the walls. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, tapping a gentle rhythm against the windowpane. Inside, in that quiet room, I wasn't someone's mother, someone's problem, someone's forgotten luggage. I was Clara Monroe. A woman with a room, a job, and a quiet corner of the world that was entirely her own. It was enough. It was everything. The first paycheck was for $186.42. Rosa handed it to me in a slim white envelope at the end of my shift on Friday. Don't spend it all in one place, she said with a wink. I smiled and tucked it into my coat pocket. It felt heavier than its worth. For years, any money I had was communal, siphoned off for groceries for David's family when they were a little tight, for birthday gifts for grandchildren who sent no thank you notes, for copays on my own doctor's appointments that no one ever offered to drive me to. But this was different. I had earned this. My own 2 feet, my own 2 hands. I walked to the bank and cashed it. When the teller handed me the crisp bills, I folded them neatly and put them in my wallet. I walked out of that bank feeling taller. Across the street was a consignment shop called Secondhand Rose. I stepped inside, the little bell on the door tinkling a cheerful welcome. It smelled of cedar and lavender. I browsed the racks, my fingers gliding over silks and wools. And then I saw it, a deep forest green raincoat made of sturdy, waterproof canvas with a warm flannel lining. It was simple, practical, and beautifully made. I tried it on. It fit as though it had been waiting for me. I paid for it with the cash from my first paycheck. "That's a great coat," the young woman at the register said. "It looks like it has stories." "It's about to get some new ones," I replied. I wore it on the walk home. A light drizzle had started, and the raindrops beaded on the sleeves. Hazel was on the porch with marmalade, sipping something from a mug. "Nice coat," she said, her eyes appraising. "New job, new coat." "Look at you," she said, a real smile touching her lips. "Putting down roots." By the 3rd week, I knew the regulars at the daily grind by name. There was Walter, a retired architect who always ordered a black Americano and a plain croissant. He was a widower, quiet and dignified, with kind, sad eyes. We never spoke of much, but we developed a comfortable rhythm. I'd have his order ready when he walked in. He'd always leave the crossword puzzle from his newspaper for me, folded neatly on the counter. One morning, he lingered after the rush. "You seem to enjoy this work, Clara," he said, his voice soft. "It's honest work," I said, wiping down the espresso machine. "There's a comfort in that." "There is," he agreed. He paused. "My wife, Clara, she always said the most important things in life are a good cup of coffee and a garden to tend." "She sounds like a wise woman," I said. "She was," he said, and then he simply nodded and left. It was the first time I'd had a conversation with a man that wasn't about what he needed from me. It was just a shared moment, a small island of understanding in the middle of a busy morning. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Hazel left it on the small table in the entryway, my name written on the envelope in a familiar, youthful scrawl. The postmark was from Charleston. My heart gave a small, complicated lurch. I took it up to my room and sat by the window before opening it. It was from Ethan, my grandson. "Grandma," it read. "Where are you? Dad and Mom are acting weird. They told everyone you just wandered off. They even filed a missing persons report, but it feels fake. I keep calling your phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. I miss you. I miss sitting with you in the garden. Please, just let me know you're okay." He had included his new cell phone number at the bottom. The letter was smudged in one corner, as though a drop of water had fallen on the ink. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my dresser, next to my copy of A Room with a View. I didn't call him. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh, and I knew that to open that door, even to Ethan, was to let the whole chaotic world of their expectations and demands rush back in. But his words were a balm. "I miss sitting with you in the garden." He hadn't mentioned the things I did for him, but the person I was with him. That night, for the first time, I turned on my phone. It buzzed to life, a frantic, angry insect. 41 missed calls. 27 voicemails. The first was from Brenda, left on the day of the flight. Her voice was a high-pitched performance of panic. "Clara, we can't find you. We thought you were right behind us. We have to board. Please call us the second you get this." A lie, delivered with theatrical flair. The subsequent messages from David were clipped, impatient, and then, finally, furious. "Mom, where are you? This isn't funny anymore." And then, "Fine. If you want to be childish, be childish. You'll have to call me when you've had enough of your tantrum." There was nothing about the 8 hours I waited. Nothing about their departure. The narrative had already been rewritten. I was the one who had disappeared. I was the one at fault. I deleted them all one by one. But I saved Ethan's number in my contacts. That I would keep. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Grandma?" It was Ethan. His voice was tentative, hopeful. "I'm here, sweetheart." A long, shaky sigh of relief on the other end of the line. "You're okay." "I'm more than okay, Ethan." "Where are you?" "Somewhere green," I said. "Somewhere I can breathe." He didn't push. He didn't demand answers. He just said, "I'm glad you're safe." I was so worried. "I know," I said softly. "I got your letter." "Thank you." "I meant it," he said. "I miss you." "I miss you too, darling." And that was it. It was enough for now. It was a connection, but on my terms. A bridge built not on obligation, but on genuine affection. As the weeks turned into a month, a quiet, steady rhythm took hold. Work in the mornings, long walks in the afternoons, evenings with Hazel and marmalade. I bought a small pot of lavender for my windowsill. I joined the local library. I discovered that Walter and I both had a passion for old black and white films. We started meeting on Sunday afternoons at the little independent cinema downtown. It wasn't a romance. It was better than that. It was a friendship. Then, on a crisp autumn Tuesday, another letter arrived from Charleston. The handwriting was David's. Sharp, angular, impatient. Hazel slid it onto the kitchen table without a word. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a formal-looking document from a law firm. It was a petition to the court, requesting emergency conservatorship over my affairs, citing my advanced age, recent erratic behavior, and demonstrated inability to care for myself. It claimed I was a vulnerable adult who had been potentially kidnapped or fallen under undue influence. They weren't trying to find me. They were trying to control me, to reclaim their asset. I read the document, and I didn't feel fear or anger. I felt a profound, clarifying cold. I folded the papers neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on the counter. Hazel came into the kitchen. "Bad news." "They think I'm vulnerable," I said. She snorted. "Idiots. They've never met a truly vulnerable woman." She poured me a cup of tea. "So, what are you going to do, Clara Monroe?" I looked out the window at my small pot of lavender, thriving in the cool Seattle air. "I'm going to hire a lawyer," I said. "And then I'm going to plant a garden." The lawyer's name was Jessica Park. She was young, sharp, and wore practical shoes. I found her through a senior services network. I sat in her sparse, modern office, the legal documents from David spread on the desk between us. "This is aggressive," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the petition. "They're trying to freeze your assets and force you to return to South Carolina by painting you as mentally incompetent." "I've never felt more competent in my life," I said calmly. Jessica smiled. "I believe you. And a judge will, too. You have a residence. You have a job. You have what appears to be a supportive community." She leaned forward. "The best defense here is a good offense. We file a response that not only refutes their claims, but details the circumstances of your disappearance. We'll include a sworn affidavit from you about the events at the airport." "I don't want to fight, Jessica." "This isn't about starting a fight, Clara," she replied gently. "It's about finishing one they started a long time ago. It's about telling your own story, in your own words, in a place where they are legally obligated to listen." So I told her everything. The years of quiet service, the casual dismissals, the 8 hours in the airport lounge. She took notes, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she simply said, "Okay, let's get to work." Leaving her office, I felt not burdened, but unburdened. The truth, it turned out, was not as heavy as the secrets I had been carrying. The next day, a package arrived. It was from Ethan. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden bird, a wren. The accompanying note was short. "I saw this, and it made me think of you. Wrens are small, but they have the loudest songs." I placed the wren on my windowsill, next to the lavender. Life continued. I worked my shifts at the cafe. I had my Sunday movie dates with Walter. Hazel and I started a small container garden on the back porch, planting winter greens and herbs. My hands, once soft and accustomed only to dusting furniture, became calloused from the soil. I loved the feeling. One morning, Brenda appeared. She didn't come into the cafe. I saw her across the street, standing under the awning of a closed bookstore, half hidden. She was wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than my month's rent. She looked pale and lost. She was watching me through the window as I poured coffee and chatted with a customer. Our eyes met for a brief second. A flicker of something: shock? Fear? Guilt? Crossed her face before she turned and hurried away. The encounter left me shaken, but not in the way I would have expected. I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange surge of power. She had come to my territory, to my new life, and she was the one who had fled. That evening, I told Hazel about it. "She's testing the waters," Hazel said, pruning a basil plant with surgical precision. "Seeing if the monster she imagined you've become is real." "And what did she find?" "Just you," Hazel said. "Which is probably far more terrifying for her." A week later, Jessica called. "They've received our response," she said. "David's lawyer called me. They're surprised. They want to arrange a mediation." "What does that mean?" "It means they want to talk. They've realized they can't just bulldoze you." "I have nothing to say to them." "You don't have to, Clara. But showing up, sitting at that table, is a statement in itself. It says you are not hiding. You are not afraid. It's the final move." So I agreed. The mediation was scheduled to happen via video conference. On the appointed day, I sat in Jessica's office, facing a large screen. I was wearing a simple blue dress and the green raincoat I had bought with my first paycheck. I felt calm, centered. David and Brenda appeared on the screen, sitting side by side in their pristine, cream-colored living room. They looked strained. A third person, a neutral mediator, guided the conversation. David spoke first, his voice tight with a control that was clearly costing him. "Mom, we were worried sick. We just want to know you're safe and make sure you have what you need." I looked directly into the camera. "I have what I need, David." For the first time in a long time. Brenda began to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "Clara, there was a misunderstanding at the airport. It was chaotic. We never would have." "Brenda," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. "There was no misunderstanding. There was a choice. You chose to leave. And I chose not to come back. It's as simple as that." The air crackled with the silence that followed. I saw the narrative they had so carefully constructed crumbling before their eyes. They had come expecting a frail, confused old woman they could manipulate back into her box. They found me instead. The mediator cleared her throat. "Mrs. Monroe, what is it you would like from this process?" I thought for a moment. What did I want? An apology? It would be meaningless. Money? I had my own. I wanted only one thing. "I want to be left alone," I said. "I am happy. I am healthy. I am home. The petition for conservatorship is to be dropped permanently. I will manage my own affairs, as I am perfectly capable of doing. My only line of contact with the family will be through my grandson, Ethan, at my discretion." Jessica slid a document across the table. "We have the terms drawn up right here." David stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride. He had lost control. Brenda was looking down at her hands. "This is what you want?" David finally asked, his voice raw. "This is what I have," I replied. The agreement was signed. The connection was severed, not with a dramatic tear, but with the quiet, deliberate stroke of a pen. When it was over, I stood up and walked to the window of Jessica's office, which overlooked the gray, churning waters of Puget Sound. "You did it, Clara," Jessica said softly from behind me. I watched a ferry make its steady way across the water. "No," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm just getting started." The days after the mediation were quiet. The quiet of a storm that has passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. There were no more letters, no more unexpected visitors. Just the steady, gentle rhythm of my new life. One Saturday, Ethan called. "Grandma? I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, Ethan. It needed to be done." "I'd like to see you," he said, his voice hesitant. "If that's okay. Just me. I can fly out." "I'd like that very much, sweetheart." He came 2 weeks later. When I opened the door of Hazel's house to him, he looked older, more careworn than I'd remembered. But his eyes were the same, kind and full of a wisdom beyond his years. He didn't hug me right away. He just stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the smell of baking bread from the kitchen, the sight of Marmalade sunning himself on the rug, the stacks of books. "So this is it," he said softly. "It feels happy here." "It is," I said. "We spent the weekend together." I showed him my Seattle. We walked through Fremont, visited the Troll under the bridge, and spent hours at the Ballard Locks watching the boats. I took him to the Daily Grind, where Rosa gave him a cinnamon roll on the house and Walter shook his hand warmly. He didn't ask about his parents. I didn't offer any information. We spoke of his plans for college, of the books he was reading, of the garden Hazel and I were planning for the spring. We were building something new, a relationship that stood on its own, separate from the wreckage of the past. On his last day, as I walked him to the light rail station, he stopped and finally pulled me into a hug. It was a real hug, strong and sure. "I'm proud of you, Grandma," he whispered. Tears pricked my eyes. "I'm proud of you too, Ethan." He was the future. Not a continuation of the old story, but the beginning of a new one. That evening, I was sitting on the back porch with Hazel, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and lavender. "He's a good kid," Hazel said. "He is," I agreed. "Takes after you." I smiled and took a sip of my tea. The air was cool, but I felt a warmth deep inside me that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the warmth of a life chosen. A life earned. A life that was, finally and completely, my own. My name is Clara Monroe. I am a woman who was left behind in an airport, but I was also a woman who chose to fly. I live in a small, blue house in Seattle with a wonderful, grumpy friend and a cat who thinks he's royalty. I work in a cafe where the coffee is strong and the conversations are real. I have a garden, a library card, and a friendship with a kind man who loves old movies as much as I do. I lost a family, but I found myself. And some days, when the light is just right and the air smells of rain and pine, I think it might be the best bargain I ever made.